What are the cruise budgeting and costs you need to watch out for in a post-shutdown world? I'm Gary Bembridge. This is another of my cruising tips for travelers. As cruising starts up again, I think there's a whole bunch of budgeting and costs that you need to be aware of that are different, evolved, or certainly you need to be more cautious about as cruising heads back out after all of the shutdown. So I want to share with you those things. And I have 7 specific cost watch-outs and budgeting watch-outs that you need to be aware of. The thing you need to bear in mind with cruising is the way the whole model works. Is the aim of the cruise lines is to sail with ships that are as full as possible. And they do that by offering attractive fares within the marketplace, depending on what the competition is at the time, to get people on board. Once they're on board, they then work to make a lot of money with people on board. It's estimated in various industry reports that I've seen that people spend between, on average, 50% and 100% of their fare once they're on board the ship. So getting people on board is really, really important. So as we look at some of these costs, watch outs, and some of the things to budget for, bear that in mind, that the aim is to get you to spend as much as possible on board. And that's really an area that you need to focus on, not just the fare itself. So let's take a look at the watch outs. The first tip I have is a really, really important one. It's a really big, important watch out. A lot of you are very eager and keen to get back into cruising, but you need to be a little bit patient before you start booking anything. Why do I say that? Well, I genuinely believe very strongly that you're going to see fares falling and availability increasing. At this point in time, it's not 100% sure exactly when ships are going to sail and when they're going to be allowed to sail. Of course, there are startup dates announced, but nobody knows when that's going to happen. Be patient and wait before you book cruises. Wait until the ships are actually definitely heading out and selling, and actually wait until the cruising does start up again. Once that happens, the cruise lines will have a much better assessment of what the capacity they have to sell, and also they will have a much better assessment of what real demand is. It is extremely likely that demand for cruising is going to be significantly lower than it was in the run-up to the shutdown. There are a lot of people that have been spooked and put off by cruising. A lot of people, of course, have come under a lot of financial pressure. There's going to be a lot of capacity, and fares are going to come down and deals are going to go up. There's going to be lots and lots of things available. So my biggest tip, my biggest watch out is, as eager as you are, look at what you want to do and only book once cruising starts again. And they are really genuinely, they know what they have to fill. At the moment, of course, they are very happy to take bookings. And if cruises get cancelled, of course, they encourage you to take future cruise credit, gets cash in. But just wait and wait and wait until cruises start again. That's a really, really important thing. Hold back and wait until the deals come. One of the great things to do if you are keen is if you've got a cruise agent, ask them to keep an eye on deals and let them alert you as these deals come in. Of course, what you can also do to get a sense of the sort of pricing is there are some sites out there that do really focus on looking for deep deals. Some of those sites include cruisesheet.com, cruisedeals.com, vacationstogo.com. So take a look at some of those sites to get a sense of the sort of pricing and deals that are going. The other thing you might want to think about is, as you head forwards in a post-shutdown world, is book last minute. And the reason I say that is I think you're going to find lots of really sharp deals, bearing in mind that cruise ships do want to sail full. So with capacity likely to be available, there's probably going to be some really sharp deals in the 90 days to 60 days. I also think that's very important because a lot of people booked cruises way before this all happened. And I think a lot of them won't cruise. So a lot of them will not pay that final balance. They'll try and find ways of getting out of going on cruising. And I think that'll unlock a lot of capacity at short notice. My second really important watch out as you're looking at budgeting and you're looking at fares and looking where to book and what to book is 2 things. First of all, focus initially on the 3 big cruising regions. The Caribbean, which is the biggest cruising region, the Mediterranean, which is the next biggest cruising region, and Alaska. Focus on those 3 because those 3 are the ones that are going to come up and running really, really quickly because they are just so important to cruising. Also, you have lots of cruise lines operating there. So focus on those 3 big areas as you're looking for deals and looking to get the sharpest prices. The second thing, though, when you are comparing prices, make sure you're comparing like with like. So what I suggest you do is, if you're looking at going on perhaps a big mega ship and a budget type ship or a more value type ship, compare fares on all those routes that you're interested in between Royal Caribbean, Norwegian Cruise Line, MSC Cruise Line, and Carnival. So look at those 4 as a group. If you're looking at perhaps a more traditional cruising experience, then look at the fares across Princess, Holland America, Cunard, P&O Cruises, if you're in Australia or you're in Europe. If you're looking for a smaller, slightly more inclusive cruise line, then what I suggest you do is take a look at Azamara, Oceania and Viking. And then if you're looking at the very ultra luxury, the very premium end, always take a look at Seabourn, Silversea, Regent 7 as a group. Make sure that you're not trying to compare across those groups. Decide what type of cruise you want and then look at the fares that are on offer in those regions across those 4 or 5 cruise lines in that particular area. That's the way you're going to be able to compare and contrast and compare more like with like when you're comparing fares and deals. The third tip I have, and this is a very, very important one, even more so than it has ever been before, is once you've booked your cruise and you have a fare, is either you or get your agent to keep an eye on prices. The cruise line, if they cut their fares, are unlikely to tell you. Now, there's been some recent developments with the Royal Caribbean Group where they are actually saying if they drop their prices, they're making it very clear that they will find some way of compensating you if prices fall. However, what's really important is the cruise lines will not come to you. So if they drop their fares on your particular cruise, in your particular cabin grade, they're not going to come and tell you that. What you need to do is keep an eye on the fare. If you see it go down, get hold of the cruise line, either by your agent, if you book via an agent, or directly. Point out that you've seen the price come down and ask what they're going to do. Now, in most cases, they will offer you an upgrade of some kind. They might offer you some extra onboard credit or some future cruise credit. But it's really, really important because I do think prices are going to be very volatile as we look at the next year or two, and prices will be all over the place. So keep an eye on those prices and make sure you know what your prices, know what the new prices are. And if it goes down, contact the cruise line and find out what they're going to give to you. They're unlikely to give you money back. They're unlikely to cut your fare, but they will bundle much more in. Very important. Now, if you're one of those people that have booked a cruise that has been cancelled and have got future cruise credit rather than cash, extremely important to make sure that you keep an eye and you know, and you've diarized or have some kind of alert so you know exactly when that future cruise credit expires. Some of them have very short expiry dates. So for example, at the time of recording, the Virgin cancelled cruises, their expiry date is only in April next year and you have to cruise by then. I think that will probably get pushed out. Other cruise lines had at the end of 2021, others have moved it to 2022, and it is constantly evolving. So make sure you know when that future cruise credit expires. And also, because if you book a cruise and you have some future cruise credit over, when you need to be able to use that before it expires, you're not just throwing money away. So do some sort of spreadsheet, put stuff in your diary, which I've done, put little alerts in my diary to remind me to keep checking and thinking ahead so I don't lose future cruise credit. My fifth tip is also a very important one when it comes to budgeting. A lot of people focus on the fare. They get very excited because they've got a great fare deal. However, as I mentioned earlier on, you could be paying anything between 50% and 100% of that fare again on your cruise. And that's just on the cruise. That excludes other things like flights or transport to and from the port, transfers from the airport to the port. One of the things I recommend when you look at budgeting and you're comparing different cruise lines on a particular route or time of the year is think door to door. So think front door to front door and all of the costs that are involved. Very important, we've seen a lot of discussion with airlines, so cutting capacity, perhaps some airlines going out of business, less routes, etc., etc. So it's possible that airfares will become increasingly more expensive and possibly even availability to get to and from cruises becomes more challenging, which pushes prices up. So do think increasingly around that door to door. So as you're looking at fares, also take a look at what do you think is going to cost you to get there, because it may be a very different price to it was in the past. And again, just think through that whole process of leaving the home, on the ship, what you're going to spend on the ship, and once you get back home. Think the whole process through because it could be very different if you just focus on the fares themselves. So that brings me on to my next point, the on-board spend. This is where you could be spending a lot of money. So as you're planning and budgeting, really important to focus on this. What we see increasingly, I think we're going to see this increasingly, is two sort of polarizing things happening. On the one hand, cruise lines are going to be pushing really hard to get people on board at the cheapest possible price and to make as much money as possible on board. One of the things that we might see happening is that the price of things on board goes up. So whether it's drinks, excursions, Wi-Fi, especially dining, they might start pushing the prices of those up to try and claw back some of the money that they've lost through the shutdown and lower fares. The other thing that I'm also seeing doing is they're trying to incentivize people to book. And one of the ways of incentivizing people is to reassure them about the overall cost of cruising. So I'm seeing more and more deals which will bundle things in. So it might give you a chance to choose from 4 different things like gratuities, onboard credits, some specialty dining, or drinks, for example, drinks packages. So we're seeing those two polarizing things. So as you look at deals, look and see increasingly whether you can get those bundled in, because that is one way of minimizing and managing your cost. But when you plan and when you budget, there are a number of critical things that you need to understand and think about that could add a lot of cost. First of all, gratuities. Most cruise lines will auto add gratuities or give you the chance to buy before. That can cost you easily across a 7-day cruise, $200, $300 or more dollars added onto your cruise, depending on the grade of cabin you're in. The second thing is drinks. Most cruise lines do not include drinks, and they push very hard at drinks packages. Personally, I tend to shy away from drinks packages. Anything the cruise line's pushing really aggressively, you have to think, well, they're pushing it because it's probably very profitable for them. So try and manage your whole drink experience. Look very carefully at drinks packages. Perhaps just buy drinks individually, because that's one way, of course, of controlling and managing your budget. Third big cost is excursions. This can cost you a lot of money, particularly if you're on a very port intensive cruise. You could be spending $75, $100 or more dollars per person per day on excursions, and that can be a big slug. One of the things I always recommend is do lots of research beforehand, go to port talks, and rely a lot on the hop-on, hop-off buses. This can be a really cost-effective way. What we don't yet know is whether you'll need to do more and more excursions as a way of managing people as they head back into ports as ships and ports start opening again. But do bear in mind you could have a big cost on excursions. The other big cost is Wi-Fi. Now, of course, you could stay disconnected, but Wi-Fi can easily add another $200 easily onto a week-long cruise, depending on the cruise line you're on. The other cost which could mount up is specialty dining. A lot of the cruise lines added specialty dining venues to try and encourage people to spend more money on board. That can be adding up again. You can be paying 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 or more dollars for specialty dining experience. So that's, again, decide if you really want to do specialty dining and budget for it. You could be adding hundreds and hundreds of dollars onto your budget on board when you go on a cruise. So be very careful. That's why I stressed again that point about the door-to-door experience. 50% to 100% of your cruise fare you could easily spend on board. So think about that and have a strategy or budget for those things. Another really important tip is if you are a shareholder in any of the cruise lines you're cruising with, don't forget that if you hold 100 shares in most of the cruise lines, no matter which of the brands you're cruising on, you can apply for extra onboard credit. There's a little bit of paperwork involved once you paid your final payment, but you can often get a couple of $100 extra onboard credit. So if you are a shareholder, don't throw that opportunity away and do send away for that. As we head into a post-shutdown world, as cruising starts up again, the way that we budget, the way we think about cruising and costs and fares, it has evolved and changing ever so slightly with some really important watch outs. These are things I think you should focus on. I hope you found that helpful. I have loads more videos packed full of cruising tips and advice. So why don't you watch another one of those right now?